Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this next episode of In the Nick of Time. Thanks so much for joining us again today. We're going to have a great time. We're going to have a great guest today. Eve joining us from ForgeRock. She has a great, amazing experience in identity management, and we're going to be able to dig into zero trust and how this ties back to identity management and how to deal with person entity, non-person entity. It's going to be a lot of fun today. A little bit technical, but I think you're going to learn a lot. As always, if you have not yet done so, please register to inthenickofTime.tv so you can get notified of the next episode. We have quite a lot of amazing guests. We're pretty much booked until, I believe, September or October. So it's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of great guests that we can do deep dive on different technical subjects and looking at the culture and the leadership. So it's going to be a lot of fun for this next summer. Also, as you can see, we have Eve joining us. And before we bring her on stage, we're going to give you a quick rundown of what she's been able to achieve. She is ForgeRock's CTO. She's really globally recognized as a strategist and innovator and communicator on digital identity, of course, security and privacy, and has a passion for fostering successful ecosystem and individual empowerment. She has 20 plus years of experience innovating and leading in standards such as SAML, user managed access, and has served as Forrester Research Security and Risk Analyst. She leads now ForgeRock's labs team, investigating and prototyping innovative approaches to solving the customer's identity challenges. And good knows the identity is the cornerstone of security. And so that's probably the most challenging and exciting field to be in cyber, alongside the policy enforcement side of the house with zero trust. And if you want to follow her, of course, she's on LinkedIn as well. I'm going to bring her in a second. I wanted to remind everybody also to reach out to us if you're interested in getting access to our new Learn with Nick platform we're launching in August 15th for early access. We have only a few number of seats left. We're also going to have a 50% discount for government employees and military personnel. So if you're serving, we want to thank you for your service and going to give you a pretty a big discount to get access to the platform. But the early access is free, so you can play with the platform and get to know what we bring to the table. It's gonna be about 45 segments between technical deep dives and culture, acquisition, contracting segments. We have different personas for CIOs, CTOs, CISOs, developers, operation guys, SREs, and so on. So it's pretty cool stuff. And then we're gonna have live events every other week with a live Q&A session. But we're also gonna have a new video every week, every other week. So 1 week we have a video, and 1 week we have a live Q&A session. So always new content. We're gonna have a private community so people can share the lessons learned. And we have so many companies excited to participate. And so you're gonna see Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies with 300, 400, 500 seats excited to join us. And so there's going to be a lot of great discussions. We have telcos, banks, governments, NATO, and 5i, and of course in the United States. And we have pretty much every field covered in healthcare and retail, and so it's going to be in space companies, lots of space companies. So everybody's kind of struggling with the same issues, but you also have very specific air gap issues as well. So it's going to be a lot of fun to be able to communicate and share thoughts and solutions in the community. And we're going to do these live events. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's only going to be accessible to the people on the platform. So, you don't need to fear about someone else joining without approval. Of course, we're banning China and Russia and other nations that we don't want to have on the platform. So stay tuned. Launch is August 15th. If you want to be added to the early access list, just shoot us a DM on LinkedIn. So we'll be able to do that. We already have 5,000 seats. It's kind of mind-boggling in in 2 days, so it's pretty exciting. All right, so I'm gonna bring now the real deal and welcome Heath. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you.
It's such a pleasure. I'm actually a big fan.
I'm
Thank
a big
you.
fan first. So, there's so much you've done, and, people that know you in industry know that, you're not only a down to earth person, and like me, you don't have a big ego. And on top of that, you get stuff done and don't just talk about stuff all day. There's so many people that just talk about things and never do anything. So, pretty excited because obviously ForgeRock is an amazing team. The lab teams is also very innovative, thinking outside the box. I'm sure thanks to you and others. But first, I always get started by giving the chance of the guests to give us a little bit about their journey. So we'll let you do that.
Certainly. Yeah. So, coming to tech, I maybe took a little bit of a circuitous route. So I'm sort of a little bit of a weird kind of geek because what I studied in university was linguistics, and not ancient languages, not exactly computational linguistics, but generative linguistics, sort of deriving syntax rules. And I think that sort of presaged my later work building markup languages, essentially. So, out of that experience, I was a technical editor for Digital Equipment Corporation, dear departed DEC. And that led me to SGML, the predecessor to XML, which I helped create. And then there started to be this whole new world of markup languages for machine-to-machine communication. So I got to participate in that, helping to create the SAML language. So some in your audience may be familiar with security assertion markup language. Everything was sort of an ML then, not meaning machine learning. And then ultimately that led me to what we now call identity. The I word wasn't in SAML, but it certainly was a part of what we were doing there. And that led to a whole new world really of security and experience, user experience, interoperability, the OAuth stack contributing to that. To becoming an industry analyst. So I did do a lot of talking in those days. And to the world of consumer identity and access management, what we call SIAM now, and then working with ForgeRock, where we help people safely and simply access the connected world. That is what we're here on Earth to do. And I run our innovation labs, which is a lot of fun and I think productive as well.
Yeah, no, that's so impressive, and honestly, your background is so so vast, and it's so interesting. I actually didn't know your background in language. It's actually very interesting. Actually, someone already commented on how unique that is. Obviously, I did not go to college, so I have background in nothing, so it's easy. But it's so exciting to see how diverse, effectively, your background is to lead you to one of the most innovative lab in identity management. That's quite the ride, and you gloss over all the pretty amazing innovations and kind of standards you help create, and it's amazing. The people who has not heard of it, in 2022. After many years, it's just do you feel like when you reflect back then, did you realize how big all this stuff was going to become?
I don't think I did. We knew that markup languages and XML would be important. At the time we started working on what we ended up calling SAML, we were doing things like considering, should we use SOAP as a transport? Because SOAP is new. You remember all these days of, SOA and
that was yesterday.
Right. And we stand on the shoulders of giants who worked on various internet standards and so on. And what I really learned was you don't know if you're going to succeed or fail with a standard. It turns out to be so important, however, the very notion of standards for doing identity, which has these tendrils into security and experience, right, in the modern era, because you end up having to fling important sensitive information over the internet. So how do you do it right? And you have to work with people who you're not the boss of to achieve that, people who may be your competitors. So it's a very interesting environment in which to operate. And I learned a lot all along.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's also, a lot of relationship building and consensus building, and it's pretty cool because that's how you get stuff done, right? And
I
that's how you
imagine
get
it's
this.
much like working with all those agencies that, you're not running, but you have to work with
Yes.
and
Oh,
the
even in DoD,
frustration.
we have so many silos and egos. It's you. No one. I don't even think SecDef is actually running the show. So it's a lot
Well,
of
there's no
people
egos in
involved.
identity, so we invite you to come along. We're all
Here
just
we go. That's
folks.
gonna be easier. So everybody ask, what's up with passwords? We've seen now guidance of, not even using complex passwords anymore, not trying to make it too hard for people to use. And so what is your thought now when you think of security and passwords?
Gosh, I mean, it's been maybe at least 15 years that I have, gone places, sat on planes next to people who are not involved in tech. And the first question they have for me when they hear roughly what I do is, "Ah, what is it with all these passwords?" So it's very durable as a question, right?
50 characters with special characters. Don't reuse the same one more than twice.
I mean, I think there is a level of savviness among the general population now. I mean, they probably know what, second factor things are and so on.
Hmm.
But, static shared secrets they're the mechanism everybody loves to hate, and with good reason. I mean, my
Yeah.
company just came out with this consumer identity breach report where we're seeing all the numbers, like they're not just increasing year after year. The bad guys have figured out how to scale. So they're
Yeah.
turning stolen credentials into data rich breaches. So it's not looking good for passwords. At the same time, there's some research that I'm a big fan of that came out of Microsoft and Cambridge University about 10 years ago, called the quest to replace passwords. This is at least as long as
Yeah.
we've been trying to do this. And they developed a set of 25 criteria for usability, deployability, and security. Only one of the security criteria is something like, resistance to phishing. And only one of the usability criteria is memory-wise effortless. If you're looking for, low cognitive load, that sort of thing. And what they found was, yeah, passwords aren't great for security. They're not great for usability. They're really kind of easy for deployability, and that's why they're so sticky.
Hmm.
And even back when I was a Forrester analyst, I was furiously writing blog posts and research about don't replace your passwords, or don't kill your passwords, kill your password policies. If you remember, Matt Honan at Wired, got hacked and wrote this huge long read about the whole thing, and I think kind of
Yes.
sensitized people about it. But so we're finding that password-based protection is failing prodigiously, as I say in
Yeah.
this new report. 2 billion plus compromised records containing a username and password last year. And that's an increase of 35% over the previous year. I mean, it's dramatic. I kind of think, we're getting smarter now about how to increase security while increasing a positive experience. It's not ubiquitous yet, in short.
Yeah, no doubt. So, passwordless and all that kind of new concept, how does that work? People get confused, right? Are we not gonna have any passwords? So what do we do? Do we just hope for the
Yeah.
best?
Yeah, passwordless there's a lot to it, and oftentimes, I mean, let's be honest, there's still this memorized secret or a static shared secret in the mix, if you have to resort to a PIN, if you lose your phone or something like that. So the goal, as stated by this kind of community that's working on passwordless, is mainly robust phishing resistance. So it's not maybe never any secrets anywhere. It's really reducing that attack surface. And so the key industry organization, here's another standard for you, that is working on this, is the Fido Alliance. We've gone through the oath era where it's all about, various kinds of OTP, and that's still, viable. It helps at the margin. But the Fido Alliance, it stands for Fast Identity Online. That's the key standards definition organization now for these elements of really strong authentication writ large, and also especially passwordless these days. So it uses public key
Who is part
cryptography.
of this FIDO thing? Who is sitting on that thing?
Well, for one, my company is a member, but there's very importantly, you look at the OS device browser makers. Are they present? And the interesting thing is they are. And that's what I think changed the game. Because I will admit to having been a skeptic, a FIDO skeptic, in its early years, like until
Right.
you get that kind of potential for ubiquity, it's hard to do, but Apple is playing, Google is playing, Microsoft is playing. And in fact, the three of them, along with Fido, recently came out with some new, it's still nascent work, needs some work. It's nicknamed Passkeys. And the idea is to be able to sort of let your credentials roam across devices, so multi-device credentials. And it kind of has to, for starters, knock back the security prospect of the original Fido standards that it's based on. This is Fido 2 Web Authn, for those who want to go look it up, Web AUTHN. This is a very popular set of standards that it's deployed in a lot of devices and browsers and things, which enables things like, Touch ID working for a website now. So it's starting to impact, consumers' experience on the good side, maybe for once. So they're working hard on this. Yeah, and we hope to be a part of that definition.
So okay, so we're gonna start embracing these concepts. But when you look at all these buzzwords right around zero trust, everybody is pretending to do some pieces or all of the zero trust the magical which doesn't really exist, but you can pretend from it. I don't see it's obviously a critical pillar of zero trust. How do you see organizations do it right?
Gosh, I spend a lot of my time these days, talking with folks about that exact question. I mean, the conversation it's hopping since the executive order. And I kind of call it a 10-year overnight sensation because, some of these elements have really been around a long time, and now it's getting hot, which is good. It also means some folks will tend to tune out this sort of trope of zero trust. Anything where you're tempted to put air quotes around it, you'll find some CISOs going, not that old thing. The fact is, the change in mindset, the change in approach it's another chance for us to take a new run at things and do them right. And some of it what you do to implement zero trust, I would call basic blocking and tackling that people knew they needed to do. The new formalization of it, the new sensitivity to the mindset, I think is really helpful. The same as, people used to know, people used to not have a password savvy, and now they're getting password savvy. And it's not because they were forced to take a course, because consumers really can't be forced to take a course the way you can, impose that on employees in your own organization. We're
know good at DoD. You have to say the one of DoD that everybody has to take. It's pretty mind-boggling.
It's, I don't want to wish those on anybody. I was just having a conversation with some folks this morning about being suspicious of those phishing resistance tests, because as my CISO likes to say, we pay people all day long to click on links for a living. And then we go and test, the artificial circumstances of whether they're not clicking on the wrong links. It's weird. If, maybe if you have the right metrics, then you can actually sort of get somewhere around, for example, phishing resistance. If that's the goal, well, maybe that'll open the door to new technologies to do it right. And so that's actually an example of how zero trust isn't a product, isn't something just off the shelf that you put in place and then you're good, as if anything gets adopted right away. It really is this helpful mindset of figuring out, data classification, inventory and classification, and going for the stuff that's the most valuable first. You being French, I'll make my Maginot line reference. It's you don't sorry, you don't want to build lots of security around something to discover somebody could just go boop. So, and that's where we discover that identity, it's not just relevant to this whole proposition, it's critical. Looking at the zero trust architecture from NIST 800-207, I mean, it was very gratifying to see that what it's showing is a model that enables externalizing and unifying your authorization, and externalizing and unifying the representation of the identities. We've had this conversation in the world before with GDPR and particularly European countries, but a lot of folks around the world with the cousins of GDPR going around privacy regulations. that forced a conversation around at least personal data classification, where I've seen the maturity levels be really pretty high in Europe compared to the US. Well, it's coming, and this helps us do it right.
Do you think we need something like GDPR here? Maybe not as bloated and cumbersome, but better than nothing. I mean,
I think
we
we might
really
get
don't
it.
have any protection right now, right? So it's
I
kind
mean,
of crazy.
I think there is a federal data privacy bill that is gaining some steam. So I'll see. We're going to get something. The question is
Yeah,
whether it's got the right metrics. I mean,
right.
I recognize the power of regulation to change the conversation. At the same time, so often it's backwards looking.
Yeah. Or it's
And does
pushing
not.
it's pushing the wrong outcomes, and it creates more bureaucracy than it's solving problems. Yeah.
Yeah. Or, I mean, security compliance isn't security, privacy compliance isn't privacy. So, it depends on what your goals are, really.
Right. Yeah, no
Yeah.
doubt. So a lot of people ask, what are the different pieces of identity management? When you think of describing it to people, what are the key components of it?
So classically, it has been seen, IAM, identity and access management for short, it's been seen as having a component of access management, which is everything runtime,
Right.
identity management, which is kind of life cycle design time. And there's a part of that that's referred to these days as IGA. So identity governance and administration. And then there's this other part that starts to be a bit more of an adjacency, which is PAM, which is the privileged access management. All that really writ large is what's in the remit of modern IAM.
So that's a good question, right? Because we have this PAM concept, right, for elevated privileges and privilege management as a whole. There's a lot of companies that initially decided to focus on, managing the access control when it comes to privileged users, right? And then we started to say, well, we're moving to this labeling world where everybody's going to have labels and data is going to have labels, and based on your labels, you're going to be able to access specific data you're supposed to have access to, right, based on the device and the type of device used and time of the day and whatever other factor. When you think of, kind of the administrative side of the house and the access control, privilege management side of the house, do you still see a need of separating special privileged access users from the normal users, or is it all going to mingle now that everybody's going to have kind of labeling baked in?
I think Zero Trust would say, really, you should treat everybody the same and only escalate privilege at the moment you need it in a contextual and fine-grained and dynamic and adaptive way. And I think that's generally right. And where we see its full flowering is in the cloud, where privileged access management looks a lot like service accounts and just protecting service accounts. However, there's a lot of, I work with a lot of enterprises that are 100 years old, or just they're very large, and they have a lot of legacy.
That's not too bad compared to DoD. We can do that.
Yeah, indeed. You're right. Fair
easy.
enough. Although we do work with a lot of governments for their citizen populations, which starts soon you're talking
that's
real
most scary. Yeah.
And when you're not the boss of them, you can't control what they do.
No one is the boss of them anyways. I don't know who is. It should be the taxpayer, but I don't think that's the case.
That said, I think, there is a long tail of weird things you have to do in weird circumstances because they're working with legacy or really close to the metal systems. And so I think there is an expression of privileged access management where your techniques have to sort of rise to the occasion of, it's code we don't even know anymore, or, you've got weird shared accounts to databases and, things like that. So I think there is that element of PAM, but a lot of the times I think PAM is starting to be a little bit absorbed into what we would just call, identity management, IGA for the workforce.
Yeah. So that's how you would rename it. And it would be everybody, not just privileged access people, but effectively everybody gets more granular access control and labeling and roles, and which is kind of what we had to do in DoD, right? To label data down to the cell level and then label users, and based on the time of day and whatever other things, the device they use and whatnot, then they get access to different things.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely that labeling. I like that. I like that terminology. Maybe you're just tagging people because roles tend to have.
We call labeling here, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like it because because role-based access control is just seen as this horrendous kind of process, and everybody has role explosion, and the
it's really
expression
roles are broader. Labels can be very granular. I guess that's
attribute-based access control. Sometimes people say, I mean, honestly, we need to have sort of a star
attributes and
now.
labels is kind of the same thing, but I just like label better. I don't know.
It's just it works for me. Totally works for me.
Doesn't matter.
And regardless of whether you're talking workforce, where you can sort of make them do things, or consumers, citizens, patients, the rest of it, a key thing that we found in identity is you need to design the runtime journey that they experience. Like, how do they get access successfully or maybe unsuccessfully to something? It's designing a journey that has the right tensions in it. Some people talk about frictionless. Well, actually, some people will be really pretty suspicious if it really is frictionless. They want
you can't have no friction in life. That's not a thing.
Right.
We've seen a no friction environment that works. It's just it's a kumbaya world.
I'm going to quote that to a whole bunch of people I know.
Well, it's true, right? So when you one thing, I guess, I don't know if you mentioned it or if it's part of one of the things you mentioned, but I guess the enforcement point, right? Where do you see that, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I was sort of going in that direction, and maybe you were just intuiting what I was going to say about, NIST 800-207 has this architecture in it for zero trust. And what's familiar about it is in part, it separates the policy decision point from the policy enforcement point. And that enables a whole bunch of cool things. You can get a unified view over your policy. You can actually inject it into the right place, out onto the edge if you need to. You can start to deploy really best practice, strong authentication sort of over your entire kind of all of your assets. So there's a lot of, and that's sort of like standard IAM thinking for a long time. I think of it as the P*P architecture coming from the, not much loved XACML standard, but it had some right ideas.
Yeah. And so do you see when we can decouple things, right? That obviously opens the doors to having maybe two different providers, but that could also create massive issues between the two, right? And vulnerabilities. Do you see, like, as for your company, do you find yourself bringing more like a turnkey solution, holistic, more opinionated maybe, or what's the vision in terms of, like, if you look at the ping of the world, they have so many products, I lose track of it. They ping federate, ping identity, ping whatever. They just have, and it's kind of confusing because they're trying to sell you the bundle anyway, but you can, I guess you could buy pieces too, which Lego blocks is not bad, right? But then I'm wondering, how does this actually integrate? Is it really as seamless and frictionless as people claim?
It can be. I mean, I like that word opinionated for, like, cloud offering needs to be opinionated and prescriptive so that you have a place to start where you can have a no code expression of what needs to be done. I mean, at ForgeRock, we think in very platform terms, and we do, we can sort of parcel out those elements I was talking about regarding sort of runtime versus design time. We also have an AI component that's really interesting. We'll talk about that later. But we really have platform thinking so that you can sew these all together and design journeys that relate to not just authentication, but onboarding and registration. So how does somebody become known to the system? And those things are really important as well. So so in terms of being opinionated, that's where we see mostly our cloud offerings sort of taking pole position.
But it's holistic too, right? You're bringing every piece of the puzzle, not just the identity without the enforcement, without the runtime.
And that's where, honestly, I think the self-managed version of what we do, that lets people really geek out if they need to, and some folks really do. We can say we're comprehensive, but it's my belief that nobody has all the use cases. They just have those 17 weird use cases in the corner, and we want to be able to say we can do those too. And so, in fact, we can. And that oftentimes requires some.
It's only the marketing people. It's only the marketing.
The word comprehensive is like, it's a plus and a minus. I like insanely flexible for my money.
Yeah, no doubt. So when you think of identity management, right? One of my argument in DoD was that the Office of the Secretary of Defense, OSD, is giving too much freedom to the services, Air Force, Navy, Army, and Space Force and Marine, to do whatever they want. There are things where you want to give flexibility, right? And there are things where you want to be opinionated. If you want to succeed as an enterprise and have some sort of ability to connect things together and have some sort of a holistic visibility and access to data, and there are things you need to be a little bit more stringent. Some you can maybe give a couple of options. Some you can give 50 options, right? Like, Platform One had 16 programming languages, 23 databases, but we had one zero trust stack, one policy enforcement point, one ICAM stack, right? We can federate ICAM identities, but we still have an enforcement point that's unique. So we have the ability to label data and have the same cohesive outcome. What do you think when you think of, identity management? Do you feel like really when you look at enterprises, the main goal is to end up having a main enterprise identity service, and that's a better way of doing it instead of leaving every team to build their own stuff in vacuums?
I honestly think that the best way is to, federated identity is a thing, right? And I think federation sort of points the way to how this can be solved, because some services are really most appropriate as completely shared services. Some can be shared within a kind of a domain, and others kind of are, whatever, personal to the agency. An expression of that we see oftentimes looking at that CIAM piece, that consumer identity and access management piece, is when you've got, a multinational or global enterprise with many, many lines of business and many brands. I mean, it's actually kind of similar to the multi-brand challenge, where everybody wants their way of doing it. They want their, personalized view onto data, onto the applications. And they're going to start being suspicious and mistrustful of any services that get that specifically wrong. So, whether it's, Toyota with many different brands underneath, or, one of our customers, they're kind of a holding company for a lot of different sports gear and sports clothing and properties in the world. And they wanted a unified identity approach, but nobody knows who they are. So they can't say, well, use the one ID of Amer Sports is the name. So they have to figure out how to do that multi-brand kind of dynamic theming, if you will. And that's something we actually solve for, because it's a really common problem. And once I see that,
but that being said, they're still trying to achieve it with the same platform. You wouldn't recommend people having Ping on one side and something ForgeRock on another. And
well, I wouldn't, but it happens.
If it's legacy stuff, there's one thing in terms of legacy, and I'm talking about starting fresh. And if you had if it's not driven by ego and silos,
greenfield,
it's a conscious decision.
We can imagine a wonderful greenfield world that looks like, Wizard of Oz, and there's a field of poppies, and that rarely happens, right?
Right.
So what's cool is, and this is where the standards kind of come in. You were talking about, policy enforcement point, sort of unifying that. Endpoints, API contracts and endpoints are really the key, because the standards have really gotten good enough, I dare say, that it's starting to be really possible that you could put in place these flows that ensure that, you present a standardized interface, others become a relying party on what it is you have to offer. And, I actually believe that setting up the incentives so that some, agency or department or line of business or even partner wants to connect up with you to get what it is you're cooking.
Right.
So I think that helps. A lot of life that goes wrong is about misaligned incentives. We see it all over the place. And so this is a place where I think it's possible to entice essentially partners.
The right behavior. Yeah.
The right behavior. Yes. Make the right thing to do be the easiest thing to do. It's easy to say.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense. That's exactly the better way to do it. Right. I mean, at some point you may need some stick for people that just have bias and, egos blocking them from doing the right thing. But ideally you want to lead with
at that point it's down to the psychologist.
I've seen it all. I've seen it all in DoD, and the issue, I guess, why I'm asking this question is it's pretty straightforward nowadays to federate identities, right? It's doable. The DoD managed to mess it up like no one else's business. Okay, so while it was doable, it was literally a disaster. And it still is, okay? Meaning I can't even see, in the Air Force, I couldn't see Navy identities or sign emails or see the calendar on Office 365 and stuff like that. The other piece of that is the enforcement point, with a zero trust PEP. Well, it's tough to federate PEPs because you start just saying, I'm just going to blindly trust this PEP by you're just delegating trust to some degree,
Yes.
and it's just then you don't do zero trust because you're just blindly trusting a third party PEP. So it compounds the more stacks you have and the more federation you do of those enforcement points, which makes me argue that there's no real way today, at least, to do zero trust federation at a real zero trust level. You just trade off, security for convenience, I guess. But so if you think of the enforcement point, right? What do you think when it comes to federation? Are you guys thinking of ways to define PolicyS code or define ways to enforce, the same kind of outcomes across product? I mean, is that even doable to say, like, let me give you an example where, for us in DoD, we could say if I use a personal device and I'm on the, unclass side, I get access to these labels, but if I have a government device, I get access to other labels. And if my device is not patched for 30 days, I don't get the labels. Or, if at the time of the day, I'm not in the US, I don't get the labels, right? So all these enforcement stuff in code, and it's all PolicyS code stuff, right? I don't know what somebody else is doing with a PEP, right? So then I lose that visibility and that enforcement.
Yeah. I tend to think, you're putting your finger on something that it's one of my favorite topics, actually, going back to the exact Mole mentioned earlier, there's just like a fish doesn't know there's water, the model that you see in P*P doesn't know who the resource owner is. And it never anticipated the separation really of, I would say not just a shallow separation, but a deep separation of the PDP and the PEP and the trust that you would have to establish between them to make that happen. Now, I know of a couple of things that come to mind that are sort of trying to pick away at that. And then we've got some real life experience with some of the kind of constituent parts. One thing is actually the user managed access standard that, I innovated, UMA. It's built on top of OAuth, so it uses the OAuth terminology, not the P*P terminology. So
right, someone already asked about this. So that's perfect.
Oh yeah, well I can see that, and I know that fellow. He's a fellow humanitarian. And what's interesting is, and this is Mike Schwartz. I will call him out because he's done some great stuff around kind of enterprise application of this model, which literally federates authorization. So, it was originally intended for the hard case of individuals getting to push a share button like you'd have in GDoc. Only it could be on any service, sharing with anybody. And so that was kind of a bold thing to do. And what we did was we enabled the conceptual separation and protocol interactions and trust being able to be established between what OAuth calls the authorization server, roughly PDP, not exactly, but close, and the resource server, the host of the protectable resources. So roughly PEP. And so by having protocol arrows go between them, and it actually has an OAuth mediated way that they hook up, that can start to address, well, how do you gain visibility over what it is they're doing? And what's their responsibility? What's your responsibility as a PDP? And so that's one technology that comes to mind. And, Mike's one of the few folks in the world who have really applied it.
Shame on me. I've never heard of it. So we need to solve that problem because if I haven't heard of it, I'm sure others here have not heard of it. So
it will be new to a lot of folks because people put it in the privacy bucket, right? They put it in user managed access is sort of about consent. Really, I think it has other implications. And I'll tell you the one thing that we've seen in the world regarding a piece that needs to be solved, and we're missing looking at this as its own thing. I call it a transparent. Okay, it's not exactly a trend. Nobody's talking about it. It's a transparent, and that is client authentication. So OAuth kind of innovated around being able to give the client application an identity separate from the person wielding it. And that was a real innovation, because now it means you're not just impersonating somebody who say, well, give me your login and I'll go act as you, right? Now you can audit that it was this application making the call to the API on your behalf instead of you. That was kind of a big deal that I think people don't realize. And here's where it gets really interesting, because we've now had some years of experience.
So it's doing the link with NP and
Yes.
now it's tracking that relationship.
Yeah, it's a non-person entity that gets an identity. It can't take on legal responsibility. You want it to have some ownership by somebody, so that's a whole other conversation. Sure. But when you look at the worlds of the open API movement, open banking, the FHIR API, fast healthcare interoperability resources in the healthcare world, one of the things you find that is the biggest bone of contention is, how do you decide which client applications are okay? Because that's the point of the most risk. The clients tend to be a huge third-party ecosystem. You don't know what developer made this client. Is it crap? So different jurisdictions in different places have made different solutions for, do we register the clients statically? Do we use OpenID Connect software statements? Or do we use plain old PKI to do this? And what's right for the circumstances? What has the right dynamicism for our needs that also gets us to being able to hunt down that bad client and kill it?
Yeah. Oh, that was very cool. So see, we learned something today, that's for sure. At least I did. So now, people started using, at least in DoD, the ICAM term, right? And industry for a very long time was more focus on IAM. What's the difference? What's the C for?
Oh, well, the C, of course, is for credential. And this is where I think, the federal government, it's really innovated and sort of pulled along innovations in the area of identity. You look at NIST 800-63, which originally was about digital authentication. It's grown up, where we expect a Rev 4 soon in draft. And now it's about, digital identity and it's sort of the full flowering. The federal government perceives this whole space as separating the management of identities from the management of the credentials that tie you to those identities. And I think that's actually an interesting and good idea. And I would say traditionally, to the extent, well, fair enough, if we're in a couple decades, we can say traditionally, IAM, the private sector market hasn't really seen that distinction the way the federal government has. And there's, good reasons for that. But the word credential is actually, it's really interesting in the modern era, because there's a sort of new wave of identity technologies where they're kind of going blockchain-y, decentralized identity, sometimes called self-sovereign identity. And in that world, verifiable credentials have a humongous role. So they kind of re-separated out.
So we were forward-leaning, so far ahead of everybody else.
Oh, who knew? The one case.
Although they didn't know why, but they just knew, right? It's just,
they foresaw a future. I mean, and it was because of, governmental needs can be different, and maybe need different scale than everybody else, and they can pull some interesting new stuff. So that's happening now, and I think I doubt that the private sector is going to change their language until such time as this decentralized identity, kind of digital wallet, verifiable credentials approach. If that sort of becomes the dominant paradigm, then I think we'll see an interesting alignment with ICAM.
Yeah. And someone was asking on Twitter, how many of the customers you interact with still don't use MFA?
Oh, a lot of them. I mean, yeah, it really isn't.
It still a majority, or is it, where are we in terms of percentages? I guess
I don't. Yeah, if I don't have percentages, I'm going to say, it's not the preponderance. Maybe we're into 50% is my wild guess.
Yeah,
and that's despite the fact that the way that we sort of enable folks to adopt a much more fine-grained adaptive approach is through a low-code, no-code approach, where you can design journeys. It would be some sort of administrator that can sort of drag and drop different risk data sources, different consequences. So it's no longer just sort of an authorized deny. You can do things like, they look semi-suspicious, let's go send them to this honeypot and see what happens. Yeah. So there's a lot of things you can do, and it encourages moving up in maturity. But enterprises with a long lifespan tend to be pretty deliberate about rolling it out.
It's kind of, is it rocket science to do this now? I would think it's easier than it.
It's not
Why is
rocket
it taking
science.
so long?
The
What's
tech
the
refresh
excuse?
cycles are getting faster. I mean, we used to talk
No,
about 3-year cycles, and now if you're using SaaS, then it can happen
that doesn't
next
stick.
week,
Yeah.
tomorrow. So that helps actually, and I think it's going to accelerate. I really think this is the year of passwordless getting cred, and no pun intended. But I think really starting to be sedimented into people's thinking and feeling like they can do it. Like the best practices are going to start really lining up.
Interesting. All right, so already a lot of people asked the question, so I'm going to bring it up anyways. What are the differences between the person entity and non-person entity? And for people that don't know what a non-person entity is, it's usually a robot, a service, a non-human thing.
Yeah. Could be a company entity, actually, which is a really interesting one, plays a role in some different things. But like, API endpoint or service, a workload, a client application we were talking about, mobile device itself, any kind of, smart device or sensor versus, people really of any description. And, I was already sort of distinguishing between, workforce members, maybe workforce members who don't work for you. So like there's, our breach report had this, show this result of, the number of supply chain and third party breach attacks were up like nearly 300% from 2020 to 21. So like that's a consideration. Consumer, citizen, patient, student, all the different kind of personas that you can have. So those are the persons. And then there's all the non-persons. I mentioned in the course of talking about that quest to replace passwords research that, there were usability and deployability and security criteria they were looking at. And I kind of, I thought it might be useful to use that same framework to talk about, how the person entity and the non-person entity identity worlds differ. So first and foremost, there's the usability kind of axis. And that's where, people have needs for privacy, and any personal data shared, whether it's, coming from an employee or, a consumer or anything, that matters. Unfortunately, it kind of infects, it infects the non-person world. But, people expect to come to a position of trust with services. And so that's a need that people have that, my phone doesn't inherently. It's an inanimate object. Actually, we're working on a project with a customer where it's about pet owners and veterinarians, caregivers, and the pets. And I can't say they're inanimate objects, but they don't have agency.
No. Yeah.
So user experience and that kind of service trust that they expect is a differentiator between them. Deployability, well, the sheer scale, there's a lot more things than there are people anyway, you slice it. And because it's not an entity that can have legal responsibility, accountability, you oftentimes have to associate a thing with a human with some identity, and so there's relationships come to the fore in this conversation. And then sometimes, not always, but sometimes there's different tech available. So I'm thinking of like the SPIFFE framework, the Secure Production Identity Framework for Everyone. I've always had a problem with that name because it's really about workload identity, but that's okay. It's SPIFFE.
It's SPIFFE, something I didn't even know what it meant. So I just used SPIFFE Inspire, so.
Yeah, SPIFFE Inspire, exactly. And then, when it comes to security, that lack of UX that you need for things comes to the fore as an opportunity, because now you can do as hard authentication as you want, as often as you want, and it doesn't care. It just depends on the cycles that it has.
So you're saying that the NP should be more like short-lived, certificates. When you think of NP with, your company, are you also solving the certificate issuance piece, or you're partnering with companies like HashiCorp or, that do that kind of stuff for a living?
We do treat, I mean, one of the things that we do that I think is really helpful is we treat things as the same kind of object, a managed object as anybody else. So, it's a first-class citizen, essentially. And that helps a lot for those relationships, for authentication and so on. we are constrained by the capabilities of the manufacturer in terms of when you provision keys. But we have something called IoT Edge that, enables quite a lot of flexibility to the extent of the type of device and the type of secure element in it. But the key is really thinking of non-people and people as entities in your system that you can arrange, that you can put relationships between, that you can test relationships about as far as making access decisions and things like that, and other business decision making. So that's how we approach it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And someone was saying that we need a unified approach for Ps and NPs. The way I think about it is they're all effectively entities, but the main difference for me, I guess, is the authentication mechanism and how quickly they're going to be able to swap certificates. Back to my question with companies like HashiCorp that do the Vault and the management of certificate and stuff like that. They also have a product called Sentinel, right? That's doing all the PCI code stuff and all that kind of stuff. Do you see a lot of customers come to you and be like, hey, we want to partner, use both kind of, ForgeRock and HashiCorp, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a kind of it's a pretty heterogeneous space still. One of the things that we do a fair amount of is connected car. So looking at, smart mobility and use cases like that. And what we're finding is, unless it's a tiny, passive sensor somewhere, a lot of times the technology stack that we use to secure, people's interactions, I mentioned OAuth a couple times already. OAuth has a device flow that is super powerful. And so you're starting to see these devices be able to handle the same kind of flow that we would have done for people, with the added benefit that you don't have to, you don't have to worry about imposing a horrible experience on them. So yay.
Right.
So whether it's a set-top box or a car or certain elements that go into a car or medical devices or things like that, I mean, they're starting to participate. That's where we went kind of originally, maybe about 10 years ago, starting about 10 years ago, from M to M with a nice crunchy shell to IoT. And, IoT is really the Internet of Things, and they're really participating in the Internet. Of course, there's risk, great risk. The opportunity is to leverage what we already know and have learned about securing APIs and securing, network-facing resources.
But you see a lot of legacy identity management products not be able to manage or handle the NP side of the house at all. They have a very tough time with it.
Yeah.
What did you guys have to do to think of it differently, so the same product and the same enforcement stack and the same principles applies to both sides?
Yeah, there's that word kind of hybrid stands for a lot of that. And it's really not just about cloud. It's sort of hybridity of everything, particularly when it's, folks who've been around, they're operating with systems that have been running in some fashion or another for many decades. I like to say there's three enemies of IT. There's time, there's distance, and there's vacuum. So, time comes with change, and sometimes we plan the change. Sometimes the things we planned didn't happen right, and sometimes we didn't plan it, cough, pandemic. I was slightly amused to see the calls for COBOL programmers go out at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, just proving that, no technology once deployed, ever dies. So we have to account for that, right? It's reasonable for someone not to change if it's doing a job. If it's not broken, they're not going to go fix it. Nobody has the time for that. And over time, you just get more and more of those things. What was once innovative becomes mainstream. What was once mainstream becomes commoditized, and it gets added to the list of things you got to do. So nothing ever goes away. Distance, even in a cloud world, latency matters. The fact that we span space starts to matter. So, depending on the imperatives of an organization, they're gonna sort of approach the cloud journey in different ways. Is it based sort of on the risk and fear part, or is it based on the greed and opportunity part? And then by vacuum, I just mean, the gaps between servers, between applications, between authorization policies and where they need to go, between data sources. And that's where, this kind of approach of integrating and being prepared to translate and being able to connect identity with all your systems, because you need to sort of identity infuse your systems where identity has to meet them where they live. So it in part is about connectors and token translation, to some weird legacy token format and all the rest of it. That's
Yeah.
really critical.
Well, I'm glad you brought up legacy. That gives me a magnificent ability to go to my next question. So many legacy identity solutions were built obviously quite a long time ago, and you talked about COBOL and so on, and many are struggling to adapt into the cloud native world. What kind of advice do you have for people like the DoD or many other companies you mentioned that are struggling with those legacy systems?
I'm sure I'm not saying anything new. My thoughts on this are simulate greenfield as much as you can. So, shim APIs are great technology that sort of force you to contend with what you have on the back end, and then trying to commit to the usage of all those standards that I was talking about. Having robustly protocol mediated communications gives you a kind of accountability, on top of that shim if need be. This is, very frequent occurrence. That ensures that you're doing things right and lets you take the time to move the back end to a place of greater maturity if necessary, or to retire elements of it. There's actually, I've been noticing over the last 10 years or so, there's this huge ecosystem of kind of like OAuth based flows and custom access tokens out there. And it shows how generative that standard stack really is. So as to enable you to kind of move at the pace that you can sustain. And in that case, if you're doing that, then token translation really becomes a linchpin. And there's, standards around token translation, but then you got to figure out the semantics of what you need to translate into what.
But I guess it's also make a good point in terms of like the value you guys end up bringing by creating all these standards. It would be much harder to move from legacy solutions in the recent years, even without some of these standards you guys created, right?
Yeah, I mean, those of us who are part of that kind of standards community, we do our best to make them respond to real imperatives. One of the things that I think has been too much of a transparent, so to speak, something we're missing is, if you want something to be successful, because to build an ecosystem is hard, to design a protocol that somebody's going to adopt just is hard, because you're asking multiple parties to change their behavior. It's the hardest possible thing you can do. And the party in the case of federated identity and similar is the relying party. Who's going to want to outsource authentication? Who's going to want to outsource the providing of attributes? It's a scary thing to do. And most service providers of whatever guise are going to prefer to do it themselves, even if it's painful and messy and expensive. And, things like identity proofing are another example of something that is being routinely overdone because they're not able to leverage some external party doing it and bringing the result to them.
Yeah, and that brings me to a good point that's going to get me into some hot water again. But I was born.
You like to go there.
When you look at the recent breach of Okta, right, with 2.5% of the customer allegedly, I don't know if that's true or not, but breached, right, and it took Okta pretty much 4 months to tell the customers, right. My reaction to this, particularly as in the government, would be to say, well, hosting your identity management stack on a SaaS multi-tenant environment is probably a massive risk. I love SaaS as much as everybody else, but I think for some things, the multi-tenancy aspect of it is pretty scary, right? Because you become a massive target, and I mean, we're already a massive target, but the fact is now you're inheriting a lot of additional headaches that you probably don't want to have. So what's your take, for larger, small organization, I get it, right? They want the simplified access to identity management, and I get it, right? But for big organizations, do you see people being okay with hosting it as a SaaS service, multi-tenant service? Or what would you do if you were in charge of DoD tomorrow and you need to migrate, 4 million identities into a stack. Do you put that on the SaaS service, or you put in a DoD cloud, commercial cloud, not crazy nonsense, but you host it yourself?
I would say, not commenting on, other companies in this respect, but, I would say it's a false choice actually, because we don't do it that way.
Interesting.
So, it's actually a patented approach to tenant isolation. That means you don't have a noisy neighbor problem. You're literally not impacted.
By we, you mean you as a company?
ForgeRock, my company. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
we just happened to take a different approach, and it's not, it's not like, it's not just that we're running a managed service for you. It's, I would say it gives you all the benefits of SaaS, and it ensures that you're not at those particular kinds of risk. So it brings to mind the conversation we were having about
the biggest thing on the website. I've looked at the site and I've not seen that as a
really?
selling point.
Well, we should make it more prominent because it's very popular.
That's like the main one for me, no doubt. I mean, particularly after Okta, you should be milking it.
Well, I will go back and tell them we should be milking it harder. It is like, when we looked at those we serve, enterprises, large enterprises, the biggest, companies on the planet, the biggest governments on the planet, we have a duty of care. And so we had to figure out how to do something a little new, and we figured it out, and that actually gives some really interesting, neat benefits. At the same time, deployment goes kind of the way you would expect a classic SaaS deployment to go. So, and it has those opinionated choices sort of baked in with the ability to sort of drop down into, the pro code kind of level, with scripting and with bringing in, third-party solutions and things like that. So that's what I would say is, don't settle for being exposed to, being your brother's keeper sort of, is not entirely necessary.
Interesting. But, assuming they don't pick you because they were stupid and went somewhere else.
People have all kinds of reasons for, their list of requirements are weird and wonderful.
Yeah, something happened, right? What would you think about? I mean, if you're the DoD and you're talking about weapons and people can die, right? Would you take the chance of doing a multi-tenant stack?
Where the risk is high, I think it's problematic. And, we're currently actively pursuing FedRAMP certification. And I know you have many opinions about that. It's, it's important for some folks that we talk to.
You're doing it, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's painful, but I totally, think everybody should do it if they can.
I think this is where there's room. There's absolutely still room in the world for what we call self-managed, on-prem or in a private cloud of your choice or in a public cloud of your choice, and we've got a whole bunch of customers that really have a hybrid deployment, and the reasons are really varied why they need to do that. Either it's because they've got a lot of legacy and they're taking their time, or because they're in banking and they're regulated, or because they're in the government and they're regulated. Or because they have those multiple brands and they allow a certain level of autonomy to each of the lines of business to do their own thing. So those are some of the reasons that you might see, actually.
Yeah, and we see we're attracting. My LinkedIn, I guess, is attracting more and more fake accounts. We had a fake account. Someone was mentioning we have a fake account commenting. I already reported her, but it's him. Who knows what gender the person is? But we have those all the time. It's not that they hacked into the comment section. It's just anyone can go and comment.
Anyone can go.
There's no hacking going on. But it's just fun.
I mean, that's actually an interesting topic, right? Because that's kind of an identity topic right there. And there's this very live conversation that was sort of first kicked off around the Elon Musk Twitter authenticate humanity. Some are holding out the opportunity to use this decentralized identity technology, completely different approach to federated identity, for those verifiable credentials where it's almost like smaller than an identity or an account, because you're just providing a single credential based on need to know. And you can even do tricks like zero knowledge proofs around what it is that you're providing. Like if they want to know your date of birth, you can supply, you can essentially figure out a way to supply just that you're old enough to do the thing they want to know you're old enough to do, or young enough, or whatever. So with regard to this, the notion of simply providing proof of humanity proof that you're not a bot, proof that you're a bag of protoplasm would really cut down on a whole lot of nonsense and fraud for a lot of services. And I find that really fascinating. I am not a number. I am a free man. I've just dated myself very precisely.
Oh no, you are 12. You were 2 years old at the time, so it doesn't.
Too kind.
So I guess, you know, digging into cloud native environments, we kind of thought about, you know, how does identity information traverse the services in these cloud environment? How does that communication and that kind of cross sharing happens?
You know, maybe it's a dirty little secret, or maybe it's like the Swiss Army knife. But, you know, when you talk about the translation between, you know, one service and another, I mean, we have these standardized kind of packets of information, right? SAML assertions and OAuth tokens and OpenID Connect ID tokens and things like this. In order to, it's an ecosystem out there of servers, and you need to kind of figure out how to translate entirely, including the security posture. You know, how do you sort of elevate security? How do you do least privileges as one of these artifacts moves throughout the system? And, you know, there's some best practices around that, about how you wrap things, how you sign things, how you encrypt things. We've gotten better at that, I would say. And so sort of, if the question is, how does it? Well, it's doing that today. And how can you make it do that for your own circumstances? It's, you know, kind of doing some of the design that you'd have to do around that, even if you were exclusively operating in your own environment. But gateways tend to be kind of that Swiss Army knife there. And of course, that changes the you know, sort of the domain you're operating in a lot of times. And that means you got to do those tricks. But, you know, like we've got an identity tuned gateway, and there's a lot of gateway products out there that are enabling this kind of movement of the artifacts in a safe and secure way.
Interesting. Maybe that should be helpful to the government and the state and local governments to finally figure out how to have a single identity for the taxpayer, so we can authenticate to all these government websites in a seamless fashion.
I think they're working on that. I think they really want login.gov to do that. So, I think people will be very nervous. You know, culturally, I think in this country, we worry about exactly those sorts of things. And you know,
but it's easier to secure, actually, if you have one account to worry about and update and, you know, use MFA on and do it right, versus having all these accounts stale and, you know, often with no MFA whatsoever. And, you know, I have accounts on the DMV at Virginia and, you know, freaking like plain stuff. And it's just, it's mind boggling, you know.
Well, and this is where, you know, this whole wallets notion is trying to sort of ride in and be a white knight in this scenario, because it's intending to centralize, you know, like whatever information about you is relevant for others to know. The idea is that you centralize it on your device. So it becomes a very edge identity solution in that sense.
Yeah.
You could have a cloud wallet, and then you know, custodial wallet.
So you keep talking about, you mentioned so many times the kind of blockchain terms. I'm taking you know, maybe a passion or something there. So
honestly, I don't know if it's a passion for it. Probably about 7 years ago, I invented, you know, when blockchain became, you know, all over Twitter and whatever, you know, I invented the blockchain drinking game. Very simple game. Somebody says blockchain, you drink. But now, wait, no, I have a new one now.
You should have asked $1. You should have asked $1. Next time, ask for $1 instead of a drink. You know,
the new drinking game, I will tell you, is the NFT drinking game, which is when you hear somebody say NFT, you drink absinthe. So
NFT is a scam. There's just no way to put it. You know, I just can't.
And this is why I'm constantly sort of going, oh, if these people say it's going to do that, these people say it's going to do that. I'm really unconvinced so far, because we know it's not the technology that solves the problem. You know, SAML has had attributes. Yeah, it's never tech problem. There's a phrase.
I mean, they're selling stuff they don't even own. Like the guy selling, you know, the Twitter guy selling his first tweet. Yeah, it's public domain once you put it out. I mean, how is that? How do you own a tweet? I just don't understand. What are you talking about? You know, a painting. I mean, I guess if it was a physical painting, you know, a digital maybe painting to some degree, I guess you could do that and sell it, but I just never understood. Anyway,
I think there's a long way to go. The way I put it is, you know, we're clearly in this toys and risk stage of these new technologies, right? um, and I think it's important to have a toys and risk stage. You don't know if you're going to come out of the stage, but the fact is we've got a lot of production use of a lot of new tech that people are motivated enough to want to try. And that is an important stage in the lifetime of any new technology. So we're at least getting the experience. Right. But as I like to say,
so are you guys working on blockchain stuff at all, or with identity?
Let me put it this way. First of all, what used to be called blockchain identity in the first year or two of the exploration, like, ooh, there's a new technology, let's see if we can use it, has turned into, first it was self-sovereign identity, which very much is sort of user-centric, I own what my stuff kind of thing. And it's moved along into a kind of era of decentralized identity, as I've been saying. And the use of blockchain has been more and more and more constrained, so that it's now, I'm gonna put it a way that folks who know SAML can sort of make sense of it. It's kind of the IDP metadata, if you will, of that world. So at least you've got a known place you can go to that's good quality, where if you want to get more dynamic about all this stuff, it's still pretty intense to set up a federation. We have SAML metadata and so on, but the idea is that you could start to really automate and scale that, so you could do it more, and you can have more issuers of verifiable credentials about the tiniest of things. So you're kind of democratizing. The vision is you're kind of democratizing identity verification, identity data verification of any type, sort of through the use of not necessarily blockchain, but some repository. So that blockchain has receded. It's taken 2 steps back every year, and now it's way back over here.
Mike, I guess Mike is right too when we say NFT is not a scam. It's going to be very useful. It's an immutable reference to a contract metadata. Tons of interesting applications for this. That's true, except most of the time it's not used like that, and it is a scam.
Yeah.
So
the world of pixelated ape is not very.
Right.
So I
don't even know. People talk about Web3 applications. I don't know what that means, because I have no clue. What 3 is? It just more fancy than 2, and why? What's the difference?
Haven't you heard we're up to Web 5 now? They skipped 4. We're on to 5.
We just come up with terms to raise money. I mean, it's a VC scam. I don't know, but it's NFT. NFT could have great use, right? I think it's the way it's being used now, and in the masses, not the exceptions, but the volume, I think, is where people are losing me. So I understand the notion of the contract aspect, and people started with. I mean, I was a very early investor of Ethereum, so I get that. But anyway, all right, let's move back to our topic, which is now security versus privacy. What is the balance? Because that's been my biggest. It's not just security versus privacy; it's also maybe security versus privacy versus innovation, and moving at the pace of relevance and not being stuck in time. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it is an age-old question, and I actually think we need to unask that question as such, and think of what the right question is. And I'll tell you why I say that. I see modern data privacy as kind of a pyramid, where we understand data protection needs to be at the bottom. And that's kind of like the don't accidentally let the data out approach. And, cybersecurity shares that with that element of data privacy. And data privacy, of course, is a big part of privacy writ large these days. And in that space, we've got a lot of things that, overlap in their application to kind of both problem spaces. We've got, strong authentication. We've been talking about encryption and hashing, and the P*P architecture kind of has elements of both. And then on top of that element of the pyramid, we've got the next element, which is data transparency. And I think that one's pretty unique. It's we like auditability of security, so it's a little similar. But telling people what we want to know about them, telling people what we do know about them, showing them the terms and conditions has become really important for establishing, why somebody should work with us. At the tippy top of this modern data privacy pyramid is data control. So protection, transparency, control. And this is where it gets really interesting, because that is such a close analog for all the access controls that we try to do in the enterprise. Only we need to scale them to individual people being able to do them, right? In fact, I was talking about user managed access, the standard earlier, UMA, and it's kind of like web access management for people. That was the sort of the original concept. So the only place where security, as we understand it, and privacy are in tension, I think, is where personal data is used and needed for security purposes. And so, where we usually find the clash is that business models want more data. And to solve that, you just need to align incentives better, not just. It's a really big thing to do, but it's about incentive alignment with the business. There's, the business manager, the VP of whatever, brand that says, we need this data because we want to advertise to these people in a very valuable way, or, we want to personalize services in a way that we hope won't be creepy, but we'll see. But the only place where I think the tension really truly exists is where you're wanting to scrape together as much data as possible to do a better job of security and fraud, mitigation. And I see a lot of what you could call privacy tech in that area that's looking to reduce the reliance on personal data. So I'll stop there and see what you think.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. I think it's a complex balance, right? People always jump to conclusions. It's always about people focus on privacy will say, well, we should really focus on privacy, and people in security forget about user experience and other reasons. Just like someone said in the chat earlier that the waste and the attack surface should be the only priority. That's just not a good valid answer, right? Because if you have a shitty user experience, I'm pretty sure it's not going to work. So you can be very secure and have a very small attack surface of 0 and have no device, and you're very
you have no business. Yeah. You're reminding me of the Twitter handle shit user story. I told you exactly. A recent one of their user stories was, as a user, I want mandatory MFA so that I can be protected from a seamless experience. It's like, oh yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, so it's a balance, right? And it cannot, the issue is when we spend too much time personally in a specific field, we tend to just, start thinking that the other side is not important, and the other side of the balance. And I've seen it, with, because I'm a software guy and a cyber guy, I've seen it also with cyber guys and the software developer experience, or the velocity versus the operation guys trying to keep, the environment stable. And in fact, I just did a video for my Learn with Nick platform about, site reliability engineering and how to balance and really have the same goal between the operation guys and the development teams, and how to agree to, the right service level indicators and objectives and agreements, and how to make sure we all work for the same outcome, despite having our own personal, smaller outcomes, so it's just interesting. So
yeah, I think that's the only way to solve the problem really persistently and robustly and deeply is to align those incentives. And it takes harder work to do that, but I think, it's always worth it.
Yeah, no doubt. So what is the role of DEAR? So we talk about all the buzzwords, right? So we have to check all of them. So we talk about blockchain, we talk about NFT. So now we have to talk about AI/ML. And what is the benefit of AI/ML to help assess your risk when it comes to identity management?
You should start publishing a buzzword bingo card before each one of these sessions.
I have all of them. All of them.
So first and foremost, I talked a little bit about IGA, identity governance and administration, that element that is applied primarily to workforces and maybe the extended workforce, partners. Administration is really, that's the lifecycle management, provisioning, deprovisioning for the right reasons in the right way. And the governance part is about the accountability. So, just making sure that you can defend access entitlements to auditors ultimately. But the reality is, this isn't going so well, right? We talked a little bit about, role explosion and using role-based access. And, I looked up the average cost of a data breach in the US. It was up 16% last year versus the year before. So, $9.5 million on average needs to be spent to remediate a breach. So IGA, I think, is seeing a lot of failures. We have poor visibility into access risk, and access certification becomes kind of like that checkbox. And, access approvals become a checkbox by a different person. And so when you look at these problems with workforce identity, you start thinking, well, this kind of could be a big data problem. We got users, we got attributes, we got roles, we got entitlements, you got entitlement assignments. So a solution leveraging all of that can help you sort of go finer grained is to get more autonomous. It's to leverage AI technology to get the better insights, to do a better job, and maybe ultimately automate. So that's something that we do. We have this thing called autonomous identity for that kind of population, and then autonomous access for actually applying such insights with a diversity of risk data sources to anybody's runtime journey. That's kind of how we're applying and how we think about the opportunity. It's like dumb tools are really annoying and they're insecure and meaning kind of coarse-grained, giving too much access or giving too little access at the point of need. It sort of brings operational risk and market risk together in focus, and that's something that AI can actually help with.
Yeah, no doubt. And when you think of the use of AI today, obviously we're still learning a lot about AI compared to what we're going to be doing in 50 years, I'm sure. When you look at the use of AI, is it still pretty much in infancy? When you look at the behavior side of AI and machine learning, do you still feel like you're starting to get a little bit stronger there, or what's the status of maturity, I guess, of AI in ICANN?
I'm going to say it is currently, it goes deep in a couple of spots. It's not yet broad. And, where we come out on this is just believing in, intelligent automation to enhance safety and simplicity across the connected world. And so I think there's a huge number of opportunities still to be exploited. I think they have to be done with an understanding that AI kind of has a trust problem. And so that's got to be taken into account from the get-go. Like explainability is it's a constraining choice. It's a choice that we've made to ensure that it isn't a complete black box. There's some exciting research going on in this area to help broaden the opportunities and choices there.
Yeah, we last episode we actually had a great discussion with an AI company on some of the risks and some of the stuff to pay attention to when it comes to AI. That was I actually learned a lot. I honestly don't always learn a lot on my show because I'm so smart and stuff. So,
you know too much.
Right, no, but literally I learned not only with you today, but also last time on the AI discussion a lot more, and I actually changed my mind on a couple of things. It takes a lot to change my mind, so it's good. All right, I have, of course, one last buzzword before we take questions from the public. The last one, obviously, is edge. What would we do with an edge? So what is different when it comes to your edge deployments for your customer and when it comes to identity? And of course, I guess you're dealing also with more volume of NP and stuff like that. But
yeah, I mean, whether you're talking about a bomber or, a car that's wandered into a no cell service area or, whatever it might be, I was talking about things. It's important to treat things as first-class citizens, and that actually helps because you start to gain the benefits of everything else you would do around identity and access. But it's really, the whole chip to cloud kind of journey for anything that's living out there at the edge is important to secure. So, we might have an end user in the picture. We understand that. We have an application in the picture. They may, have an account with that application. We kind of got our arms around that. And then you get to the gateways that I was talking about. I mean, there's so many ways in which gateways are kind of the glue holding everything together to whatever that end node is, and the opportunity to leverage whatever secure element there might be, whatever hardware security module there may be. It's important to start having sort of robust attestation of whatever it is that you're talking to. So kind of starting from square one with the thing that is out there at the edge. Disconnection is a reality for some of our customers, and the use cases run to things like cruise ships that are out in international waters and might or might not have a satellite feed at the moment.
Right. So it's edge also air gapped or is disconnected or intermittent. Right. Like we do all that in duty all day. So that's
exactly fun. Right. Yeah. You've got folks out, in various kinds of field. So but I was talking maybe more than I intended to about the decentralized identity kind of universe, but that's kind of an edge approach to identity that is interesting to think about and maybe work on. Could that have a role in edge everything else? Devices and applications and things that are running in these environments. So honestly, I think, what's different besides potential for disconnection, potential, constrained ability to process things. Also, maybe the biggest thing and the most famous old thing is getting out of date with what the reality is on the ground for policies, provisioning, deprovisioning, things like that. So those are the things that come to mind. I said time, distance, and vacuum, and to a certain extent, these are distance problems.
For us, we have, I guess, all the special CPUs, right? So non-x86 chips that complexify also the software that's running on these platforms, and so we have to support real-time operating systems, and makes it a little bit harder, to do that at the edge. So.
Yeah, there's greater variety. There's simply greater variety. It's a species of the problem when you have kind of a large third-party ecosystem out there connecting to you. So, you can't make the problem go away. You can push the air bubble under the wallpaper around, though.
Yes. All right. So we're going to take a few questions. One that I guess Mike is a very smart guy. I highlighted 2 questions from him. One we kind of quickly talked about, but you didn't answer the specific question about do you see UME use cases in the federal government, specific DoD maybe, and if so, what would they be?
Yeah, I do, and I started to go down that road. We had and Mike is one of the humanitarians. He's had a lot to do with it. We had started solving problems for individuals and for individual scale, which is very hard scale because there's so many people that you're not the boss of. When it comes to DoD, I think, your question about PDP, PEP separation put, the pin right into it. I think it has that opportunity because it's actually the only standard I know that sort of has a robust model of putting together those two kind of roles in a way that is loosely coupled but highly alignable. So that's where I see, sort of enterprise delegation of anything to anybody, delegation of authorization, delegation of access. That's the possibility where the resource owner is, an agency itself. We do see that use case where, the resource server, the host of the resources, is the resource owner, which, OAuth didn't contemplate, UMA did contemplate. So that's how I'd answer that one.
That's good. I like it. I need to learn more about UMA, so if you could send me stuff because I really never heard of it, and I love to push it in the government. So
awesome.
All right. So then Mike has another question too about all innovations in decentralized identity going to impact the federal level DoD space. Isn't the X509 already decentralized?
Oh. I mean, there are folks who are working on that right now, actually. So we're members of ATARC, which is a place where some of this is being pursued as an inquiry. And in the guys,
X509 is as decentralized as what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, there's DPKI, which maybe puts the lie to X509 being decentralized itself. And methods of revocation are really interesting to me, actually. I'll spend a second talking about this because, there's a mechanism in PKI for revocation. I'm just going to put the question out there. How well does it work? And I have questions about how it's going to work in a decentralized identity world that we're positing, because yes, let's say you share a credential. Let's say it's a certification that I am qualified and approved to work on a particular sensitive device or system out in the field. And it expires. And it could be deprovisioned. And you might use this revocation mechanism to sort of take away that credential. Are the systems that are going to be consuming this credential information, are they going to be capable in that edge sense we just talked about of actually doing that? Or are we going to have a kind of perverse incentives world where there's more copies than ever of that particular attribute, and it's really not practically possible to revoke it. These are some of the things I worry about when it comes to this new technology. The tech is there. We just don't know how it's going to work in the world of weird incentives. But there are a lot of folks working on, in particular, the decentralized identity-ish area of mobile driver's licenses. So that's state level, and there's questions. There's like an active inquiry at the federal level going on about how to make them all interoperate. So, Nick, you were sort of saying, oh, I'm going to have an app for this state, an app for that state, and an app for the other state. What is that all going to mean in practice? And again, it's sort of being worked on. So I think they will impact the federal space. I think PIV cards probably aren't going away for a really, really long time.
It's actually worse than per state. It's per agency per state, right? So it's just it's mind-boggling. All right, so we have a question from Donald about what about data trusts?
Data trusts are really interesting. I'm hoping to visit my friend in the UK soon who specializes in data trusts. So, it's the opportunity to basically have a trust framework over a data sharing agreement. And getting good data is really important for making good decisions. Kind of the signals to decisions pipeline is kind of what identity is there for. It's to help you do that for access, right? And so I think the making it possible to scale the availability of huge sets of data in a safe way is an opportunity that we have. The world now has in the identity world, there's kind of a lot of efforts to work on trust frameworks, basically the contractual elements that allow folks to do the federated thing together or do the data sharing together. And so they're kind of a species of how you could do a data trust. And just going by how many of those we have, dozens upon dozens in the world. Canada has one, New Zealand has one, and the US has several because there's one for healthcare. And, so are they working well for us yet? I know I'm not answering the exact question. I would say there's not yet proof that we figured out how to scale that. But there is some really interesting work among the .orgs of the world around data trust specifically that I think is promising.
Yeah, no doubt. This is all very exciting because I think that's where we need to focus and address some of these issues. So, yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, I'm looking at the comments going along, and there's a lot of people expressing doubt about things I have doubt about as well. So we agree anyway. Whatever that's worth.
So we always do. First, I wanted to thank you for taking the time. This was great. We learned so much today. I think it was one of the best sessions we had in 8 months. So wanted to thank you. I always give the guests the last words before I let everybody go. So I'm going to give that to you in a second. First, I want to tell people who the next guest will be next week on Tuesday, August 2nd, the day before my birthday. So David Wheeler, dear David, coming from the Linux Foundation, will be with us to talk about open source supply chain security and the work being done by the OpenSSF on supply chain and with the White House and all that good stuff, and SBOM, software bill of materials, and all that good stuff. So if you want to join us next Tuesday to talk about supply chain risks, that's going to be a great guest. He's awesome. He has COVID, poor guy right now, so hopefully he's going to be feeling better. If not, he has to come to the show anyways. I told him, so I don't care.
Hey, virtual.
So yeah. It take a bunch of vitamins, but over to you now for the last words.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say, I've been talking a little bit about this data we have available, some reports we have available, the Consumer Identity Breach Report. One of the things that we like to do where I am is, with our vision, invite you to imagine a world where we never log in again. And that requires a whole bunch of new thinking about going fine-grained, concentrating on experience with the twin foundation of security. And it's all to be able to help people safely and simply access the connected world, because we do have to scale this, because the bad guys are scaling this. So, this is completely doable. So I'll invite you to, join me over at ForgeRock.com to check out some of the resources that we've been advertising here in the crawl. And please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just let me know you were watching the program.
Well, thanks so much. It was a great episode. We'll see you soon, hopefully, and everybody in the meantime, stay safe, healthy, and keep fighting the good fight. So our kids have a fighting chance at winning against China 20 years from now. Thanks, everyone.
Here, thanks. Bye.